The wedding coordinator hurried across the ballroom, her headset hanging around her neck, her face pale with panic. She stopped directly in front of me, looked down at the simple navy blue suit I had worn for the occasion, and asked quietly, "Sir, are you really supposed to be sitting at table 7? Before I could answer, my daughter stepped between us. "No," she said with a smile that looked perfect to everyone except me. "He's confused. Just show him to the back, or maybe he can wait outside until the ceremony is over." The room wasn't silent, it was worse. People kept talking. Glasses kept clinking. Music continued drifting through the speakers, as though nothing important had happened. And somehow, that made the humiliation even heavier. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the child whose tiny hand had wrapped around my finger before she learned to walk. She didn't look angry. She looked embarrassed. Embarrassed by me. I was Daniel Harper. I was 62 years old. And at that moment, surrounded by nearly 200 guests, my own daughter decided I wasn't worthy of sitting at her wedding. She thought I would quietly disappear. She had no idea someone else had already decided to stand up for the truth. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and your city in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. And if stories about family, betrayal, quiet strength, and justice speak to you, subscribe so you never miss another one. My name is Daniel Harper, and for most of my life, I believed that being a father meant protecting your children even when they misunderstood you. I grew up in a small farming town in eastern Kansas, where people rarely locked their doors, and almost everyone knew exactly how much money everyone else made. My father repaired tractors. My mother worked the overnight shift at a nursing home. Neither of them ever earned more than $35,000 a year, but somehow they managed to make me believe we were rich in all the ways that mattered. Our house had one bathroom. The kitchen floor squeaked near the refrigerator. Every winter, my father stuffed old towels beneath the doors because cold air slipped through the cracks. Still, every Sunday evening we sat together around the same oak table. Nobody checked phones. Nobody rushed away. Those dinners became the foundation of everything I believed about family. When I turned 12, my father gave me my first lesson that stayed with me forever. A neighbor had lost his barn during a storm. Without being asked, my father spent 3 weekends rebuilding it. When I asked why he was working for free, he smiled. "Character," he said, "is what people remember after they've forgotten how much money you had." At 12 years old, I thought those words sounded old-fashioned. At 62, I realized they were priceless. I wasn't the smartest student in school. I wasn't the strongest athlete. But I worked. Every summer I stacked hay bales, painted fences, cleaned grain silos, and repaired engines. By 18, I had saved $11,400. Enough to attend a state university without asking my parents for help. I graduated with a degree in civil engineering. My first job paid $43,000 a year. It felt like unimaginable wealth. I met my wife, Rebecca, during my second year working for a construction company. She laughed loudly. She loved expensive restaurants even before either of us could afford them. She believed appearances mattered. I believed effort mattered. Back then, those differences felt exciting. Later, they became cracks. Then they became walls. When our daughter Emily was born, everything changed. Or at least I believed it had. I worked longer hours. Accepted difficult projects. Spent months traveling to supervise bridge construction across 3 different states. By the time Emily turned 10, my salary had climbed to $118,000. By 45, I had become Regional Operations Director, overseeing projects worth more than $300 million. The title sounded impressive. The reality meant airports, hotels, conference rooms, thousands of miles away from birthdays, school plays, dance recitals. Every trip came with guilt. Every paycheck felt like an apology. So I tried making up for my absence the only way I knew. college savings, private tutors, music lessons, summer camps, health insurance. Every opportunity I never had. I never considered those things sacrifices. I considered them responsibilities. Maybe that was my mistake. Children rarely notice what quietly protects them. They notice what isn't there. One memory still visits me more often than I'd like. Emily had just turned 8. Her school hosted a father-daughter picnic. I promised I would be there. The night before, a highway bridge outside Wichita developed structural cracks after severe flooding. Emergency inspection. Mandatory deployment. I called Rebecca from the airport. "I'll be home tomorrow night." Emily overheard. When I finally returned, I found a paper plate sitting on the kitchen counter. A dried peanut butter sandwich. Half an apple. A handwritten note in crooked pencil. "I saved your lunch because I thought maybe you would still come." I kept that note. It's still folded inside my wallet today. At the time, I promised myself I'd never miss another important day. Life had different plans. The promotions continued. The responsibilities multiplied. And somewhere along the way, Emily stopped asking whether I would be home. She simply assumed I wouldn't. That hurt more than any argument ever could. Rebecca handled nearly everything inside the house. School meetings, birthday parties, neighborhood friendships. She became the visible parent. I became the provider. Nobody intentionally planned it that way. It simply happened one decision at a time. Looking back now, I realize families don't usually fall apart because of one terrible event. They drift apart through thousands of ordinary moments that seem harmless until they're impossible to recover. Emily entered high school bright, ambitious, and incredibly talented. She won debate championships, graduated near the top of her class, earned scholarships worth almost $90,000. I couldn't have been prouder. Every achievement felt like proof that all those years of hard work had meant something. But I also noticed something changing. Whenever people praised my career, Emily would quickly mention that Mom had done all the real parenting. At first I agreed. Because in many ways she had. Rebecca attended every parent-teacher conference, every doctor appointment, every choir concert. She deserved recognition. What I didn't realize was that the story being told inside our home slowly changed. Instead of Dad worked hard for us, it became Dad chose work over us. Those two sentences sound similar. They are completely different. One explains, the other accuses. I didn't notice the difference until years later. By then, the damage had already taken root. And none of us understood just how expensive that misunderstanding would become. Rebecca and I divorced when Emily was 23. People always ask whether there was one final argument, one dramatic betrayal, one moment when everything collapsed. There wasn't. There were thousands of tiny disappointments stacked on top of one another, until neither of us could remember what the marriage had once felt like. The divorce itself was surprisingly polite. No shouting. No courtroom battles. No ugly headlines among family members. She kept the house. I kept my retirement accounts. We split our savings almost evenly. When everything was signed, I transferred another $80,000 into Emily's graduate school fund. I never mentioned it to anyone. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted her future to be easier than mine had been. Rebecca remarried 3 years later. Her new husband, Richard Collins, owned a successful chain of luxury furniture stores across the state. He drove imported cars, played golf every Saturday, knew which wine to order without looking at the menu. People admired him immediately. He had that kind of confidence. To be fair, Richard wasn't a cruel man. He simply believed success should be visible. If you were successful, people should see it in your clothes, your watch, Your neighborhood. Your vacations. Everything was presentation. I came from a world where success meant paying your bills on time and helping your neighbors. Richard came from a world where success meant proving you had more than your neighbors. Neither philosophy was completely wrong, but they couldn't exist comfortably under the same roof. Emily slowly began speaking Richard's language. The first time I noticed it, we were having dinner together after she'd finished graduate school. She looked around the restaurant and said, "Dad, image matters. People judge you before you even speak." I smiled. "They usually stop judging after you've spoken." She laughed politely. "No, they don't." That conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. It stayed with me for years. By then, Emily had accepted a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. Her starting salary was $92,000. Within 4 years, she had nearly doubled it. She was brilliant, creative, driven, the kind of professional every company wanted. Whenever people congratulated me on raising such an accomplished daughter, I smiled with genuine pride. Because despite everything, I never stopped believing in her. We simply stopped understanding each other. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. Birthdays turned into text messages instead of conversations. When I invited her fishing like we used to when she was little, she always seemed too busy. When I mailed handwritten Christmas cards, she replied with digital thank you messages. Nothing terrible happened. Everything simply became distant. One autumn afternoon, about 2 years before her wedding, I invited Emily to lunch. Just the two of us. No special occasion. No hidden agenda. I wanted to reconnect. She arrived 20 minutes late, carrying 2 phones and answering emails while sitting across from me. "I'm sorry," she said without looking up. "This campaign is driving everyone crazy." I understand. For almost 15 minutes we talked about work, traffic, weather, safe topics. Finally I asked, "Are you happy?" She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean genuinely happy." She leaned back. "I'll be happier when I finally get where I want to be." "And where's that?" She smiled. "I don't know yet." That answer worried me. Because I'd spent decades around ambitious people. The ones who never defined enough rarely found peace. Before we left, I handed her a small envelope. Inside was the deed to a lakeside cabin I'd quietly purchased years earlier. Nothing extravagant. Just 2 bedrooms, a wooden dock, tall pine trees surrounding calm water. It had become my favorite place on earth. "I want you to have it someday," I said. She looked confused. "Dad, this has to be worth at least $300,000. "Probably. Why now?" "Because I want you to know there's always somewhere peaceful waiting if life ever becomes too loud." She stared at the papers, then gently pushed them back across the table. "I appreciate it, but honestly it's not really my style." Not my style. 4 simple words. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was simply being honest. But honesty can leave bruises. I folded the envelope and slipped it back into my jacket. "I understand." We hugged outside the restaurant. It felt polite. Not warm. Not cold. Just careful. As if both of us were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Months later, Emily called with exciting news. She was engaged. His name was Nathan Brooks. An architect. 34 years old. Thoughtful. Soft-spoken. The first time I met him, he asked more questions about my bridge projects than anyone had in years. He listened. Actually listened. When I described designing flood-resistant foundations, he leaned forward like I was telling an adventure story. By the end of dinner, I liked him. A lot. After Emily stepped away to answer a call, Nathan quietly said, "She's incredibly talented." "I know." She's also carrying around a lot of pressure. I looked at him. What kind of pressure? He hesitated. The pressure to prove something. To whom? He smiled sadly. I don't think she knows. That conversation stayed with me. Because it sounded true. The engagement party arrived 6 months later. Richard hosted it at an upscale country club. Crystal chandeliers. Live jazz quartet. Waiters carrying silver trays. Everything was elegant. As guests introduced themselves, I noticed something strange. Several people assumed Richard was Emily's father. Every time it happened, he corrected them politely. But Emily never did. Not once. Maybe she felt awkward. Maybe she assumed someone else would explain. Maybe she didn't notice. I noticed. One woman laughed and said, "Your daughter has your confidence." Richard smiled. She's worked very hard. I stood less than 10 feet away. Emily heard every word. She simply changed the subject. That night, driving home alone, I turned off the radio. Silence felt easier. I wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired of wondering whether correcting people had become inconvenient. Over the following months, wedding plans took over everyone's lives. Rebecca coordinated flowers. Richard discussed the venue budget. Emily obsessed over guest lists. Nathan mostly smiled and tried, keeping everyone calm. I offered to pay for part of the wedding. Emily thanked me but declined. Richard already has everything covered. It shouldn't have bothered me. Yet somehow it did. Not because of the money. Because of what the money represented. For the first time in my life, there was no place where my contribution seemed necessary. A few weeks before the wedding, invitations began arriving. Mine came in a plain white envelope. No handwritten note. No personal message. Just a printed invitation like everyone else's. Inside, I found something else. A seating card. Table 7. The last table in the ballroom. Near the service entrance. Far from the family tables. I stared at it for nearly 5 minutes. Surely it had to be a mistake. Then I called Emily. She answered after the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad. I just wanted to check something." "Sure. My seat, table 7. A pause. Then her voice became strangely formal. "Yes, we had to organize people based on relationships and logistics." "Relationships. You'll still have a good view." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I quietly replied, "If that's what you want." "It is." We ended the call less than a minute later. That evening, I took the invitation to the lakeside cabin. I sat on the dock until sunset, holding the seating card between my fingers. The paper itself wasn't important. It was what it quietly admitted. Somewhere along the journey from father to guest, I had become optional. And I still had no idea that the wedding day would reveal just how much of the truth had been hidden from me, and from everyone else. The week before the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped trying to fix things. For nearly 10 years, every conversation with Emily had carried a silent goal. I wanted us to return to what we used to be. I wanted one long dinner, one honest conversation, one shared memory that would somehow erase years of distance. Eventually, I realized relationships don't heal, because one person keeps reaching while the other keeps looking away. Sometimes love means leaving the door open. It doesn't mean standing outside it forever. So I mailed her a handwritten letter. Not to argue. Not to defend myself. Just 1 page. I told her I was proud of the woman she had become. I wished her happiness. I apologized for every birthday I had missed, and every promise work had forced me to break. I didn't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't something you request. It's something another person chooses. 3 days passed. Then 4. No reply. On the 5th day, my phone finally buzzed. For a brief second, I smiled. It wasn't Emily. It was Nathan. "Mr. Harper," he said quietly, "do you have a minute?" His voice sounded unusually careful. "Of course. I don't really know how to ask this." "Then just ask." Another pause. "Did Emily ever tell you why she doesn't want you sitting with the family?" I looked out the kitchen window toward the maple tree in my backyard. I assumed she had her reasons. "She does." "What are they?" Nathan exhaled slowly. "I don't think they're true." That sentence caught my attention immediately. "What do you mean?" "I've heard her tell people that you abandoned her, that you never supported her, that you only cared about your career." I closed my eyes. Not because I was angry. Because hearing those words out loud somehow made them real. "I see. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. I just thought maybe you should know. Thank you for telling me." He hesitated again. "I've tried talking to her. And she says that's how she remembers her childhood." After the call ended, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Memory is a strange thing. Two people can live through the same years and carry completely different stories. Emily remembered absence. I remembered sacrifice. Neither memory erased the other. The painful part was realizing that intentions don't automatically become someone else's experience. I truly believed I had worked for my family. Emily truly believed I had chosen work over my family. Both statements could exist at the same time. The following afternoon, my younger sister, Laura, drove over unexpectedly. Laura was 58. Unlike me, she'd never left our hometown. She taught 3rd grade for 32 years, and somehow knew every child's birthday without writing any of them down. She carried a peach pie through my front door without knocking. "You look terrible," she announced. "I've looked terrible for 20 years. She laughed. "No, today it's different." I poured coffee while she sliced the pie. After a few minutes, she finally asked, "Wedding nerves?" "You could say that." Nathan's phone call was still fresh in my mind. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly. "You know what I think." "What?" "I think Emily has spent so many years explaining your absence that she's forgotten your presence." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Laura smiled sadly. "She remembers the school plays you missed." "That's fair. But she's forgotten who paid for the theatre lessons." She pointed toward me. "She remembers waiting at home." I nodded. "She's forgotten every Saturday morning when you built treehouses, fixed bicycles, and taught her algebra." I hadn't thought about those Saturdays in years. The treehouse took 6 weekends. The bicycle repairs happened almost every summer. We built a science fair volcano that accidentally exploded red foam across the garage ceiling. Emily laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Somewhere inside all the painful memories, those happy ones still existed. Laura reached into her purse. "I found something while cleaning Mom's attic." She handed me a faded notebook. It belonged to my mother. Inside were dozens of handwritten family memories. One page caught my attention immediately. July 18. Daniel drove all night from Colorado to make Emily's piano recital. Arrived 15 minutes before it started. Never told anyone he hadn't slept. I stared at the words. I'd forgotten that entirely. Another page. October 4. Emily cried because Daniel left for another bridge project. He cried too after she went to bed. Rebecca didn't see it. My throat tightened. There were moments no one else had witnessed. Mom had. She had quietly written them down. Laura closed the notebook. Parents don't always get remembered accurately. No, they get remembered emotionally. That sentence stayed with me. 2 days before the wedding, I visited the old storage unit I'd rented after the divorce. Inside were boxes I hadn't opened in years. Tax records, old blueprints, Christmas decorations. Near the back, I found 3 plastic containers labeled simply EMIL White. I lifted the first lid. School drawings, Father's Day cards, report cards, handmade birthday gifts. Every tiny treasure I'd secretly kept. At the bottom sat an old cassette recorder. Curious, I found spare batteries in another box. The tape still worked. Static filled the speaker. Then a tiny voice. Daddy, when I grow up I'm gonna build bridges with you. Emily, maybe 5 years old. I'll bring your lunch every day. Another childish laugh. So you'll never be lonely. I couldn't stop smiling. Or crying. Sometimes both happened together. I listened to nearly an hour of recordings. Camping trips, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. They weren't proof. Love isn't something you prove with evidence. But they reminded me that our story hadn't always been broken. Someone had rewritten parts of it over time. Whether intentionally or not, I still didn't know. The night before the wedding, I ironed my navy suit. The same suit I'd worn to my retirement ceremony 18 months earlier. Nothing expensive. Just well cared for. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I caught myself practicing a smile. Not for photographs. For Emily. Because regardless of where she seated me, regardless of what anyone believed, she was still my daughter. I wanted her wedding day to begin with kindness, not another argument. I went to bed before 10. Sleep never came. At 6 the next morning, I drove toward the venue beneath a grey summer sky. About halfway there, my phone rang again. Nathan. Mr. Harper. His voice sounded even more nervous than before. I need to tell you something. What is it? I think today something's going to happen. What kind of something? I can't explain over the phone. Is Emily all right? Yes, but someone important arrived last night. Who? Nathan lowered his voice. I honestly don't think anyone expected him to come. Before I could ask another question, he quietly said, "Just, please don't leave today, no matter what happens." The line went dead. I had no idea who he was talking about. But somehow, for the first time in years, I felt that the truth had finally started moving toward all of us. The wedding venue overlooked a quiet lake about 40 miles outside the city. It was the kind of place magazines described as timeless elegance. White stone walls reflected the morning sunlight. Tall oak trees lined the entrance, and rows of fresh white roses framed the walkway leading toward the ballroom. I parked my 12-year-old pickup truck beside rows of luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. Vehicles worth more than my first 3 houses combined. For a brief moment I almost laughed. Not because I felt embarrassed. Because I remembered teaching Emily to drive in that very truck. The dent near the rear bumper came from the afternoon she accidentally backed into our mailbox. She cried for nearly an hour, convinced I would be angry. Instead, I bought us hamburgers. We laughed about it all the way home. Funny how objects remember kindness longer than people sometimes do. I stepped out carrying only a small gift box. Inside wasn't jewelry. It wasn't cash. It was the old silver compass my father had given me when I graduated from college. On the back he'd engraved 6 simple words. Always know what truly matters. I wanted Emily to have it. Not because it was valuable. Because someday I hoped she would understand why it mattered. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed several guests looking in my direction. Some smiled politely. Others searched their memories, trying to remember where they'd seen me before. One gentleman approached with an easy smile. "You must be Richard's older brother." I smiled gently. "No, Oh, business partner. No. He looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I rescued him. I'm Emily's father. His eyebrows lifted for a split second. Though, just one word. Not rude. Not insulting. Simply surprised. That tiny reaction told me everything. Somewhere along the planning process, people had formed an entirely different picture of Emily's family. Inside the reception hall, decorators hurried between tables making final adjustments. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath enormous chandeliers. Each table displayed handwritten place cards tied with silk ribbons. Near the entrance stood a massive framed timeline, filled with photographs from Emily and Nathan's relationship. Vacations, birthdays, engagement pictures, family holidays. I slowly walked closer. Rebecca appeared often. Richard appeared even more. Nathan's parents appeared throughout. I searched quietly. Finally, near the bottom corner, I found exactly one picture of myself. It had been cropped from a larger family photograph. Half my shoulder was missing. I smiled anyway. At least I was there. Even if barely. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Daniel. I turned. Rebecca stood only a few feet away. She looked beautiful in a soft blue dress. Older, of course. So was I. Time had added silver to both our hair and gentleness to our faces. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Then she hugged me. It surprised both of us. You came early, she said. I wanted to stay out of everyone's way. She lowered her eyes. I'm glad you came. I wouldn't have missed it. She hesitated before speaking again. I know things have been. She searched for the right word. Complicated. I nodded. They have. I hope today goes smoothly. So do I. Before either of us could continue, someone called her name from across the ballroom. She squeezed my arm lightly. Then walked away. Watching her leave, I realized something. Rebecca looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying responsibilities heavier than she'd expected. An hour before the ceremony, guests began filling the venue. Soft piano music echoed through the hall. Laughter grew louder. Champagne glasses circulated from group to group. I stayed mostly by myself, near the windows overlooking the lake. Not hiding. Just observing. Eventually, Richard walked over. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly. Everything about him projected effortless confidence. Daniel. Richard. He offered his hand. I shook it. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the invitation. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. I know Emily's seating arrangements weren't exactly. He stopped. I didn't make them. I never assumed you did. He looked relieved. For what it's worth, I argued against them. That surprised me. You did. Several times. I studied his face. He wasn't lying. Why? He answered immediately. Because regardless of history, you're her father. Those words carried more weight than he probably realized. For the first time, I saw something different in Richard. Not a rival. Not a replacement. Simply another man trying to keep peace inside a family that had grown increasingly complicated. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded once, then returned to greeting guests. Maybe I'd judged him too quickly all those years. Maybe we'd both judged each other. Just before the ceremony began, an usher approached. Mr. Harper. Yes. He looked uncomfortable. I'm supposed to escort you. Of course. I followed him down a side hallway. Instead of leading me toward the reserved family seating, he stopped beside the final row. I'm very sorry. He looked genuinely embarrassed. These were the instructions I received. I smiled. It's all right. He shook his head. No, sir. His voice became almost a whisper. It doesn't feel all right. Sometimes compassion from a stranger hurts more than cruelty from family. Because it reminds you what simple kindness looks like. Guests slowly filled every pew. I watched mothers straighten dresses. Fathers adjust jackets. Grandparents wipe away happy tears before the ceremony had even begun. Then the music changed. Everyone stood. Nathan entered first. Calm, steady. He glanced around the room until he found me. Our eyes met briefly. He gave the smallest nod. It wasn't dramatic. It felt almost like reassurance. Moments later, Emily appeared. She looked radiant. Every father believes his daughter is beautiful. That morning she truly was. For a second, all the disappointment disappeared. I didn't see distance. I didn't see arguments. I saw the little girl running across a soccer field, looking for me after scoring her first goal. I saw tiny hands covered in birthday cake frosting. I saw missing front teeth and scraped knees. I saw my daughter. Nothing else. The ceremony itself was lovely. Simple vows. Gentle laughter. A few tears. Nathan's voice trembled once. Emily smiled through most of it. When they were pronounced husband and wife, everyone stood applauding. Including me. Especially me. Because despite everything, I wanted her marriage to begin with hope. After the ceremony, guests moved into the reception ballroom. Cocktail hour began. Conversations filled every corner. As I made my way toward table 7, I noticed where it had been placed. Beside the service doors. Directly next to the kitchen entrance. Every few minutes, waiters pushed carts past the table carrying stacks of plates. 3 seats remained empty. Apparently, several guests had chosen not to attend. I sat quietly. Across from me was an elderly couple I'd never met. The husband smiled warmly. You with the bride's side? Yes. Family. I answered simply. I'm her father. His wife looked confused. Though, she glanced toward the front of the ballroom, where Rebecca and Richard sat beside the newlyweds. Then back at me. Neither of them asked another question. They didn't need to. The seating chart had already answered it for them. As speeches approached, I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the small gift box containing my father's compass. No matter how the day ended, I still intended to give it to Emily. Because love doesn't disappear just because it's rejected. It simply waits. And somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, completely unknown to almost everyone inside, a black sedan had just pulled into the parking lot. The man stepping out carried no invitation in his hand. But before the evening was over, he would change everything. The black sedan came to a quiet stop near the front entrance. Most guests never noticed it. They were too busy laughing, taking photographs, or finding their assigned tables. I only glanced toward the windows because one of the valet attendants suddenly straightened his posture. Then another employee hurried toward the entrance. Whoever had arrived wasn't ordinary. The man who stepped out looked to be in his early 70s. Grey hair. Dark charcoal suit. No unnecessary jewelry. No dramatic entrance. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected other people's lives. The event manager personally opened the ballroom doors for him. That almost never happened. He looked around the room slowly, as though searching for someone. Not the bride. Not the groom. Someone else. Before I could think much about it, the master of ceremonies welcomed everyone to dinner. Guests found their seats. Silverware clinked against china. Conversations rose and fell like gentle waves. From table 7, I watched my daughter smiling beneath strings of warm lights. She looked genuinely happy. Part of me wanted to freeze that moment forever. Because despite everything that had happened, I still wanted happiness for her. The first speech came from Nathan's best man. It was funny, heartfelt. Everyone laughed. The second speech came from Rebecca. She spoke beautifully about watching Emily grow into a determined young woman. Several guests wiped away tears. When she finished, the ballroom filled with applause. Then the master of ceremonies smiled. And now we'd like to invite the bride to share a few words. Emily stood gracefully. She adjusted the microphone, smiled toward the crowd. I just want to thank everyone for being here. More applause. This day wouldn't have been possible without the people who truly raised me. She turned toward Rebecca, my incredible mother. Then toward Richard, and the man who showed me what steady support really looks like. The applause grew louder. I clapped too, quietly. Then Emily continued. I've learned that family isn't defined by biology. A strange feeling settled into my chest. It's defined by the people who actually choose to be there. Silence spread slowly across the room. Some guests glanced around uncertainly. Others continued smiling, assuming this was simply part of the speech. Emily wasn't finished. There are people who think paying bills makes them parents. Her eyes drifted toward the back of the ballroom. Toward me. But children remember who actually showed up. The room became painfully still. I decided that today should celebrate the people who earned their place beside me. She smiled again. So if anyone wonders why certain seats were assigned the way they were. She paused just long enough for every person in the room to understand. That's why. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the waitstaff froze. I looked down at the white tablecloths. Not because I was ashamed. Because I suddenly understood. This hadn't been a private misunderstanding. It had been intentional. Public. She wanted everyone to know exactly how she saw me. The elderly woman sitting across from me quietly reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. She didn't know me. She didn't know my story. She simply recognized pain when she saw it. Sometimes strangers offer the purest kindness. I smiled at her. Thank you. She squeezed my hand gently. Across the ballroom, Nathan wasn't smiling. Neither was Rebecca. Richard lowered his eyes. For several long seconds, nobody knew what to do. Then polite applause slowly began. Not enthusiastic. Uncertain. People clapped because they believed speeches were supposed to end with applause. Not because they felt comfortable. I quietly stood. Picked up the small gift box. Straightened my jacket. There was no anger inside me. Only sadness. I decided it was time to leave. As I reached the edge of the ballroom, I heard someone behind me. Mr. Harper. I turned. Nathan stood there. I'm so sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. Please don't go. I smiled sadly. Your bride just explained exactly where she wants me. He looked back toward Emily. Then back at me. You deserve better than this. Maybe. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Take care of her. He stared at me. Even after everything. Even after the humiliation. That was still my concern. He nodded slowly. I will. I turned again toward the exit. Then another voice echoed across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't the master of ceremonies. It wasn't one of the musicians. The deep, calm voice came from near the entrance. Every conversation stopped. The elderly gentleman who had arrived in the black sedan now stood beside the microphone. I apologize for interrupting. His tone was respectful. But before this father walks out that door, He looked directly at me. There is something everyone in this room deserves to hear. Confused whispers spread. Emmy. Charles Whitmore looked around the ballroom without the slightest hint of anger. He wasn't there to embarrass anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited until every conversation had faded into complete silence. Only then did he speak again. I know this is a wedding. He smiled gently toward Nathan and Emily. And I have no desire to overshadow a celebration. He paused. But I also believe celebrations should never be built on a story that leaves out the truth. Emily stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, with respect, I don't understand what this has to do with today. He nodded politely. You don't. Then he looked at me. But your father does. I stood motionless. The last time I had seen Charles Whitmore had been nearly 18 years earlier, at the dedication of a flood-resistant bridge in Missouri. We had shaken hands, spoken for perhaps 10 minutes. That was all. I never expected to see him again. Charles opened the envelope. Inside were several worn folders, photographs, and official documents. I spent 38 years directing emergency infrastructure projects across the country, he began. My job wasn't simply to build bridges. It was to decide which communities would survive floods, hurricanes, and structural failures. He lifted the first photograph. It showed dozens of construction workers standing knee-deep in muddy water. Near the edge of the picture, I recognized myself. Nearly 30 years younger. Covered in mud. Smiling despite looking exhausted. Charles held the picture high enough for nearby tables to see. Does anyone know what week this photograph was taken? No one answered. He did. The same week Daniel Harper missed his daughter's elementary school picnic. A murmur spread through the room. Emily's expression changed slightly. Charles continued calmly. That bridge carried nearly 40,000 vehicles every day. It developed catastrophic structural damage after historic flooding. If that project had been delayed... He looked around the room. Our investigators estimated the probability of a collapse within 6 weeks. Silence. Daniel Harper didn't miss a school event because he wanted another promotion. He missed it because 73 engineers refused to sign off on a bridge they believed was unsafe. He volunteered to lead the emergency reconstruction. Charles placed the photograph back on the podium. He slept in his truck for 9 nights. He worked 19-hour shifts. He refused overtime bonuses. He asked that the extra money be given to younger workers with children. I felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward me. I wanted to disappear. Not because I disagreed. Because I had never done those things expecting anyone to know. Charles pulled out another document. 5 years later, Hurricane Evelyn destroyed transportation routes across 3 counties. He held up another photograph. This one showed helicopters overhead. Collapsed roads. Temporary steel bridges. Daniel was supposed to begin a 2-week family vacation. Instead, he quietly unfolded another page. He cancelled it. He never submitted reimbursement. He told his wife only that work needed him. Charles lowered the paper. What he didn't tell anyone. His voice softened. Was that emergency crews estimated thousands of elderly residents would lose medical access if temporary crossings weren't completed within 72 hours. Rebecca slowly covered her mouth with her hand. I remembered that vacation. Emily had cried for days. I cried too. Just not where anyone could see. Charles looked toward Emily. I understand that as a child. You experienced absence. No one is denying that. His words were careful. Measured. But absence and indifference are not the same thing. The ballroom remained perfectly still. He removed a final folder. This one matters most. He smiled faintly. 18 years ago our foundation established an anonymous education fund. It paid college tuition for children whose parents died maintaining public infrastructure. He looked down at the documents. For 12 consecutive years. He glanced toward me again. The largest private donor wasn't a corporation. It wasn't a billionaire. It wasn't a celebrity. It was your father. A gasp moved across the room. Emily blinked. What? Charles nodded. He requested complete anonymity. He specifically instructed us never to publish his name. He said. Charles unfolded one final letter. If those children know someone cared, that's enough. They don't need to know who. No one moved. No one even reached for their drinks. Charles continued. Over 12 years. Daniel Harper quietly donated $1,348,000. He funded engineering scholarships. He purchased adaptive equipment for disabled students. He paid mortgages for families whose loved ones died repairing highways. He attended almost none of the award ceremonies. Because he believed generosity stopped being generosity the moment it became performance. The room was utterly silent. Emily stared at me as though she were seeing a stranger. Her lips parted. She whispered barely loud enough to hear. I didn't know. No, Charles answered gently. You didn't. He closed the folder. And neither did anyone else. He looked toward the guests. You've spent the last 15 minutes hearing what Daniel Harper supposedly failed to do. I thought you deserved equal time hearing what he actually did. He stepped away from the microphone. Then stopped. There is one more thing. He reached into his inside pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. I almost forgot. He smiled at me. I've been carrying this for years. It belongs to you. I frowned. I don't understand. Charles unfolded the paper. It is the recommendation letter you never received. The board unanimously voted to award you the National Civic Service Medal. He looked down. But before we announced it, you retired. We lost contact. He raised his eyes again. So I came here today. To make sure the man who spent a lifetime building bridges finally understood something. His voice caught for the first time. Sometimes, the strongest bridges are the ones nobody notices until they're gone. There wasn't a single sound in the ballroom. Not applause. Not whispers. Just hundreds of people sitting in absolute silence. Because for the first time, they weren't looking at the man seated at table 7. They were looking at the father they had never really known. No one applauded immediately. Some moments are simply too heavy for applause. People remained seated, absorbing what they had just heard. I wished they wouldn't look at me. Recognition had never been comfortable. I had spent my entire career solving problems quietly, then moving on to the next one. Being the center of attention felt unnatural. Charles walked away from the microphone and crossed the ballroom toward me. Every step echoed in the silence. When he reached my table, he extended his hand. I stood and shook it. Then, to my surprise, he pulled me into a brief embrace. Thank you, he said softly. I smiled. I was only doing my job. He laughed quietly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The ballroom finally erupted into applause. Not the polite applause people give after a speech. This was different. People stood. One table after another. Then another. Within seconds, nearly the entire room was on its feet. The elderly couple sitting beside me stood first. Nathan's parents stood. The wedding staff standing near the kitchen doors began clapping. Even the musicians set down their instruments. I looked toward the head table. Rebecca was crying openly. Not dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears she no longer tried to hide. Richard slowly stood as well. He looked directly at me and nodded once. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was respect. Nathan stood immediately after him. His eyes never left mine. Then everyone looked toward Emily. She remained seated. Her face had gone pale. She wasn't angry. She looked lost, as though the story she had believed for years had suddenly cracked apart beneath her feet. She slowly rose. The applause continued around her. But she wasn't listening to it. She was looking only at me. I saw confusion, regret, disbelief, and something else. Fear, not fear of me. Fear that she had misunderstood the person who had loved her most. She walked away from the head table. No microphones. No audience in mind. Just slow, uncertain steps across the ballroom. People instinctively moved aside. Within moments, she stood in front of me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Is it true?" I smiled gently. "Which part?" "All of it." I looked at Charles. He gave the smallest nod. I turned back to my daughter. "Yes." She shook her head. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I thought about that for a long moment. Then answered honestly. "Because I didn't think love needed a resume." She closed her eyes. Fresh tears slipped down her cheeks. I thought. Her voice broke. "I thought you chose work instead of me." "I know. You never corrected me." "I tried a few times." I smiled sadly. But after a while, it sounded like I was defending myself. She covered her face with both hands. "I told everyone." "I know. I humiliated you." I reached forward and gently lowered her hands. "You hurt me." I didn't pretend otherwise. But hurting someone isn't the same as losing them. She stared at me. "I don't deserve you." I quietly shook my head. This isn't about deserving. It's about understanding. For the first time since she was a little girl, she stepped forward and hugged me without hesitation. She held on tightly. Very tightly. As if she were trying to recover years that had quietly slipped away. I closed my eyes. There are moments in life when forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives as a decision. Standing there, surrounded by nearly 200 silent witnesses, I made mine. Not because the past no longer mattered, but because I didn't want it deciding our future. Around us, the ballroom remained silent. No one interrupted. No one pulled out a phone. No one treated the moment like entertainment. It belonged only to us. After several long seconds, Emily stepped back. She wiped her eyes. Then looked toward the stage. She walked slowly to the microphone. This time there was no polished smile. No rehearsed speech. Only honesty. "I need to say something." Her voice trembled. "I spent years telling myself a story." She looked toward the guests. Parts of that story were true. My father missed birthdays. He missed school events. He wasn't home as much as I wanted. She took a deep breath. But I confused absence with not caring. She turned toward me again. I never asked why. I only remembered how it felt. Another pause. "And today." She struggled to continue. "I publicly judged a man whose sacrifices I never bothered to understand." She looked across the ballroom. "I owe my father an apology." She didn't make a dramatic speech. She didn't beg. She simply said the hardest words any adult can say. "I was wrong." Silence filled the room once more. Then Rebecca stood. She walked beside Emily and gently placed an arm around her shoulders. "I need to apologize too." Everyone looked toward her. There were years when I was angry. I let that anger shape conversations. She lowered her eyes. "I never lied to my daughter. But I also didn't always tell the whole truth." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. For that, I'm deeply sorry. Richard stepped forward next. I can't change what happened before I entered this family. He smiled faintly. But I can say this. He looked directly at the guests. Today I met the man people should have been talking about all along. Then he turned toward me. And Daniel. He extended his hand. I've respected your work for years. I should have respected the man sooner. I shook his hand. No hard feelings. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Nathan quietly laughed through his own tears. I guess. He looked around the room. This wasn't exactly the reception any of us expected. Soft laughter spread across the ballroom. Gentle. Relieved. Human. The tension finally began to dissolve. For the first time that entire day. It felt like a wedding again. And for the first time in many years. It also felt like a family. The rest of the evening unfolded differently than anyone had planned. The timeline of speeches was forgotten. The schedule printed on elegant cards became meaningless. People stopped worrying about what was supposed to happen next. Instead, they simply gathered together. One by one, guests approached my table. Not because of Charles's speech. Because they wanted to shake my hand. A young engineer introduced himself. My name is Alex, he said. I drive across the Jefferson River Bridge every week. I smiled. I know that bridge. He laughed. I figured you might. Then his expression became serious. I never thought about the people who built it. He extended his hand. Thank you. A middle-aged woman approached next. My father was a highway inspector. She hesitated. He died while working. I nodded quietly. I'm sorry. She smiled through tears. He received one of those anonymous scholarships you talked about. Charles gently corrected her. No. He looked toward me. He received one of Daniel's scholarships. She stared at me in disbelief. Then hugged me without another word. That hug lasted only a few seconds. It somehow carried decades of gratitude. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone for a while near the dance floor. Not hiding. Thinking. Every so often our eyes met. She looked away, then back again, as though she was still trying to reconcile the father she remembered with the man she had just discovered. Eventually she walked over carrying 2 coffee cups. Just coffee. Not champagne. Not wine. Coffee. She smiled nervously. I remembered. I looked at the cup. Black. You always drink it black. I laughed softly. You remembered. She sat beside me. For a few minutes, we simply watched guests talking and laughing again. Finally, she spoke. Dad. Yes. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever hate me? The question hurt more than everything else that had happened that day. I answered immediately. No. Not even today. No. She looked down. I don't understand how. I smiled gently. When you were 6, you accidentally broke your mother's favorite vase. You cried so hard you couldn't breathe. She nodded slowly. I remember. Did your mother stop loving you? No. Then why would I? Fresh tears filled her eyes. I've spent years believing I wasn't important enough for your time. I looked out across the lake visible through the ballroom windows. I made mistakes. I should have said no to work more often. I should have explained more. I thought providing for my family automatically showed love. It doesn't. She whispered. I wish we'd had this conversation years ago. So do I. There was nothing else to add. Some regrets cannot be erased. They can only become lessons. A little later Nathan joined us. He pulled out a chair. I have a confession. Emily looked at him. I invited Charles. She blinked. You what? Nathan nodded. I found his name in one of your father's old retirement articles. I contacted him 3 months ago. You planned this? I planned for the truth to have a chance. He looked at me apologetically. I honestly didn't know what he was going to say. Charles, who happened to be walking past, laughed. I didn't tell anyone. Nathan smiled. I noticed. Emily looked from Nathan to Charles. Then back to me. You all trusted the truth more than an argument. Charles nodded. Truth usually wins. It just isn't always fast. As dinner ended, the band invited everyone onto the dance floor. The first dance had already happened earlier. Now families joined together. Children laughed. Grandparents swayed gently. Nathan stood and held out his hand toward Emily. Mrs. Brooks. She smiled for the first time that evening. I like how that sounds. They walked toward the dance floor. Halfway there, she suddenly turned around. Dad. Yes. The father-daughter dance. She swallowed hard. We skipped it. I looked toward the band. Then back at her. It doesn't have to stay skipped. She walked back toward me and held out her hand exactly the way she used to when she was 5 years old. Dance with me. I stood. I'm not very good anymore. She smiled through tears. You never were. We both laughed. The band quietly changed songs. The room seemed to understand without anyone making an announcement. As we stepped onto the dance floor, conversation softened. I placed one hand on her shoulder. She rested hers against mine. We moved slowly. Awkwardly. Perfectly. I used to stand on your shoes, she whispered. I remember. So I wouldn't miss the steps. You still don't have to. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder. I'm sorry, Dad. I know. I'm really sorry. I know. For the next 3 minutes, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Some conversations happen without words. When the music ended, applause filled the ballroom once more. This time it wasn't for recognition. It wasn't for awards. It wasn't for success. It was simply for reconciliation. Later that evening, before guests began leaving, I finally handed Emily the small gift box. I almost forgot. She carefully opened it. Inside lay my father's old silver compass. She turned it over and quietly read the engraving. Always know what truly matters. She looked up at me. I'll keep it. I smiled. I know you will. She slipped it into her handbag as though it were the most valuable thing she owned. Maybe in a way it was. As I walked out of the ballroom that night, no one asked whether I belonged there. No one questioned my seat. No one mistook someone else for the bride's father. None of that mattered anymore. Because real respect had never come from sitting at the front table. It came from a lifetime of quietly living in a way that truth could eventually defend. And I finally understood something my own father had tried to teach me all those years ago. Character doesn't always speak first. Sometimes, it simply waits until every lie has finished talking. Tell me in the comments, if you had been in Daniel's place, would you have walked out after the speech or stayed and let the truth reveal itself? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with Revenge Cold Stories. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.